Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is a Ukraine War news update for the 23rd of April 2023. Right, let's get to our usual opening gambit. The Ukrainian figures for the Russian losses for the day before, all the usual caveats apply, propaganda, inaccurate potentially. I think these are indicatively useful and more accurate recently than critics have been giving them credit for being. Liquidated personnel, 690. That's there or thereabouts for what it's been for the last week, really. 3 tanks, 1 APC, 5 artillery systems. That's fairly low, I guess. I think we grind into the end of the Russian offensive. We're going to start moving towards the Ukrainian counteroffensive with preparatory activities taking place. Anyway, 1 helicopter, that's a significant loss for the Russians. 4 drones, 12 vehicles and fuel tanks, and 2 pieces of special equipment. 2 pieces of special equipment is potentially fairly useful. Electronic warfare or radar systems. But other than that, yeah, fairly average day. 5 artillery systems is okay, I guess. They've been explicitly targeting artillery systems and pieces to try and neutralize the threat that they pose, possibly ahead of a counteroffensive as well. Right, the Mi-24 is a Hind helicopter that was shot down. Ukraine have just claimed they shot down a helicopter. They don't say exactly where, presumably Donetsk region, or what happened to the crew. In addition, 4 Russian drones were shot down, 2 reconnaissance and 2 Lancet kamikaze drones, according to Tim White. And then we go on to strikes that the Russians have had against Ukrainian Kharkiv. There were 4 or 5 explosions. It seems that they were using S300s there again in the village of Kotelyrivka, 140 kilometers west of Kharkiv. No wounded or dead following the attack by Russia, but a big fire. And there's a private garage, cars and houses were damaged. And in Belgorod, it appears that there was an explosion as they were firing off the S300s. So I don't know if you heard that. Let's see if we... So it could be that one of those S300s or something went wrong. I don't know. Belgorod has been the scene of a few things going wrong for the Russians recently, with the bombs being released from the airplane. Well, after firing S300s into Kharkiv, they are slingshotting mopeds. So those are the Shahid drones towards Zaporizhia and Dnipro, just your average evening, says Andrew Perpetua. And then no report says also Kharkiv is under presumably S300 rocket attacks and provides some footage of explosions. Reportedly, 1 civilian infrastructure building was hit, waiting for more information. So that was what happened in Kharkiv with regard to S300s. And then S300s were used against Sloviansk, which is a town near Bakhmut, just behind Bakhmut, Kramator, Sloviansk, Druzhkivka, that kind of area. According to the mayor, the quarry district, another district, and several private houses were damaged, but there were no casualties. Of course, they don't really shout about whether military targets are ever hit. So all you ever hear from the Ukrainians, same with the Russians, is that residential areas were hit, etc. So that could well be exclusively the case, or it might be that some military targets were hit as well. So I haven't got too much footage to share with you that really support any of the claims, because there aren't really any big claims. It's quite a quiet day in general for news. But here's some footage of mines being hit by an ID drop from a drone. And it's quite an explosion. Dozens of mines there. Bang. So quite often these sort of halls of mines are hit by drones. And of course, that stops those mines being used against the Ukrainians. Mines, I think, will be a huge problem going forward in the counteroffensive. Another bit of footage that's doing the rounds is this chap that runs and throws a satchel, some kind of bag. Brilliant throw, gets it in a dugout. But there's one claim that it's an anti-tank mine that he's actually throwing. So he set it, lobs it in, does a runner, good throw, and then bang, that is one way of taking out a dugout. Really, really useful hit that. But yeah, just lobbing a bag in with an anti-tank mine. It's good a method as any. Right, here is question mark. Is this a JDAM? So there's some thought that this is JDAM. It'd be odd to use a JDAM just against what looks like a tank, unless there was any other target in the area. But we've got a drone checking out. Oh, God, it's early. Um, and then bang, that's a really big hit. I don't know. I don't know whether it's a JDAM. We have heard that they have JDAMs. There are claims that certain explosions are JDAM explosions. So just to remind you, those are the bombs that are dropped from aircraft that have guidance fins or wings and GPS to give them greater range and accuracy. We have seen Russia start to use these in the form of their FAB 500 and other types of munition to some decent effect. And this was kind of in response to the US giving these JDAMs, but we haven't really seen an awful lot of footage of JDAMs. Only perhaps potential footage or potential JDAM footage. I'm not wholly sure. Anyway, on to odds and sods. Murder out and talking about SODS, murder, alcohol, and prostitutes. Wagner convicts pardoned by Putin return to terrorize hometowns. Now, this Guardian article talks about two particular cases. I've already reported one of them previously of people being murdered, innocent people getting murdered back in their hometowns by convicts who have returned. When you've got, murderers and rapists and the most troubled in society who have been locked up without much rehabilitation in Russian prisons, just in case of locking them up generally and letting them get on with it, then they're released. They don't have the skills to reintegrate into society. And what do you expect when 5,000 of these are being released back into where they've already terrorized or other such places? So although it's quite anecdotal, this article, because it really concentrates on just two accounts, you can imagine that going forward this is going to be a problem for the Russians, and it also will I guess drive a wedge between civilians and what their MOD are doing, what the government are doing. You can't help but have a bad taste in your mouth for the whole war project if some of the worst convicts are being released back into your neighborhood. Okay, Russian military command is inclined to stop the offensive operations in Ukraine and prepare for the defense, but is wary of talking about it to Putin personally, according to the Institute for the Study of War. According to the ISW, some ultra-nationalist figures claim that the Russian Ministry of Defense has notified them of efforts to bring in 400,000 contract troops to ensure that Russia has enough manpower to effectively freeze the current front lines in Ukraine. The Russian military command is also transferring conscripts to maintain Russian positions in Crimea. Of course, that's not in the agreement with the kind of conscript contract, if you like. They're not supposed to put conscripts onto the front line. But at the beginning of the war, back in February last year, it was found that there were conscripts indeed sent into Ukraine, although they didn't, for the large part, I don't think, realize that they were going into a war zone. They thought they were on training missions, so on and so forth. But anyway, a few interesting nuggets there. And I can imagine Putin is not the kind of guy you want to give bad news to. And the bad news here is, that whole war thing we're doing? Yeah, it's not going very well. And that whole offensive that we've just done for the second greatest army in the world, yeah, we haven't actually captured anything. A couple of villages around Bakhmut. So, yeah, I wouldn't want to tell that to Putin. Right, I'd be worrying of defenestration. Kyiv Independent reports France to aid. So moving on to military aid, and as you see, there's only two tabs here, so not a lot to report. France to aid Ukraine in restoring the rail network. France is set to assist with bridge construction, shipment of rails and locomotives to railway operator Ukralinitsia, as well as light rail systems in cities, according to the Ministry of Infrastructure. That's really good to see. Spain, 6 Leopard 2 tanks and 20 other vehicles have left the port of Santander and are now on the way toward Ukraine, possibly via Poland. So that's good news. We talked about those Leopards yesterday, but 20 other vehicles will be useful, I'm sure, as well. Um, Moving on to geopolitical things, as I say, not too much news today. The president of Brazil responded to the proposal to visit Ukraine. So this is Lula. I talked to you about this for the last couple of days. He's been a bit controversial because he's straddling both sides of the fence in terms of Brazil being a member of BRICS and historically cozying up to Russia, and then Lula kind of continuing that as well. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, has been visiting Brazil, and his chap, is it Amorim? Do Yes, Kelso Amorim, the special assistant for international affairs, has been in Russia, I believe. But now, so what happened was Zelensky did the clever thing, which is all right. If that's where you want to position yourself, and I must have to say, after that happened, then they got into trouble, and then after Lavrov left, Lula was like a lot more critical of Russia. So it's the idea of like trying to navigate this fine line between the two, between the US and Russia, and knowing that he's got eggs in both baskets. Brazil, that being now. Zelensky then responded by saying, "All right, that's how you feel. How about you pop over to Ukraine?" And actually, credit to Brazil at least somewhat here. No, Lula isn't going to go to Ukraine. However, he is going to send his special assistant for international affairs, who was the one that went to Russia. So there is at least some kind of parity there between, going to both countries. And actually, if anything decent comes out of this for Ukraine, that would be good. So you hope that Amorim has some kind of persuasion in the Brazilian government, and also gets to be persuaded whilst in Ukraine. So that's, I think, good news, probably as good as you're going to get from Brazil at the moment. I severely doubted that Lula would go himself personally to Ukraine, but at least he's sending, the person who previously went to Russia. So there is that. Russian Foreign Ministry says it's expelling a number of German diplomats in what it calls mirror action to a previously unannounced move by Berlin as relations between the two countries continue to deteriorate. So I talked a lot about diplomats previously, and about how Russian diplomats in particular aren't really diplomats. They're often, well, they appear to be entirely spies, espionage agents, and often technical agents who are utilizing technology to snoop and listen to the city around the embassies. Anyway, that is happening. Agriculture ministers from the Group of Seven, the G7 advanced economies, on April the 22nd agreed to continue to support Ukraine's agriculture sector, which has been thrown into confusion since Russia's invasion. So you can imagine how affected the agricultural sector has been in Ukraine. I mean, the amount of the fields that we've seen, just, well, that have become war zones. Literally, you can't do anything with those fields, and then you're pumping them full of metals and shrapnel, and yeah, just horrific. So the agricultural sector, particularly in the east, is going to be hugely affected by this war. And then there is all the grain that is struggling to get out. And indeed, we're still having issues of Ukrainian grain transiting through Europe, or being sold into Europe and not getting to other places where it's needed, and not getting out the Black Sea easily. It's just a real challenge. And obviously, Ukraine being one of the breadbaskets of the world, this is of huge concern to the rest of the world, indeed. And G7 are taking a lead there with assisting the agricultural sector. Well, on this front, Russian smuggling operation that has used falsified manifest and seaborne subterfuge to steal industrial amounts of Ukrainian grain continues unabated, and it is a war crime. CMC's Bulka Matros Shevchenko transited Bosphorus, so that's the straits, the access to the Black Sea through Istanbul, carrying plundered wheat from occupied Sevastopol to Syria. So the Russians are still able to get stolen grain, stolen wheat out of the Black Sea, and you know, m- making a benefit garnering a benefit out of the whole situation of the war in terms of, well, plundering wheat and grain and selling it to make money, which I assume will then somehow find its way back into supporting the war project. Anyway, that's the news for today, the 23rd of April. Really appreciate you watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. And all the ways you can help the channel are in the description below. It is Sunday. I've got to see one of my boys play rugby today, so I'm going to be a little late with videos. I've got an awful lot on today, so I'm not going to guarantee videos, but I'll try and get them out later today. Toodle pips.